Alright, so this is InDesign, it's booted up. You should hopefully have downloaded the support files off of Blackboard. There's um, the architecture is pretty much exactly the same as all the other Adobe Creative Suite products. You have this new and open option, and then it displays either in list form or in, if you click over here, picture form, your previous files that you opened. Um, just like before, there's presets, there's new files. So the first thing I'm gonna do, just to go over this, we're gonna create a new document. And to run you through what these different things mean, just like it sounds, number of pages is a specified number about how many pages you can start with this. Intent, print, web, or mobile, just like before. A start page number. Now this doesn't really make a lot of sense when you're just making a solitary page, but what it means is that when we start doing automated page numbering, our page numbers will actually start on whatever page you want. So this would be really good if you're just doing a solitary section for your document, like you might want to start on page 20. Um, Facing pages deals with whether or not it is set up like an open book, so meaning uh, 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 there's a spine to the book and there's a left page and a right page. If you uncheck it, it essentially treats the document as each page individually, kind of like if you stapled a stack of paper together or bound it with a paper clip or something of that nature. Um, I'm going to keep it checked for now just so you can see what it visibly looks like. Orientation, you of course have landscape and portrait. You can have these presets for paper sizes. That's fine. Right now what you're seeing is you're seeing the notation in a format called pikas. Something that's starting to become, I feel at least, is starting to become used less and less, but it was a horizontal unit of measurement for typography, which is why it's set up this way. We can change that in the units just like you were shown in Photoshop and in Illustrator. Height is pretty obvious. Columns, so this is a little bit different. So columns, just like there are columns of type in newspaper, you can specify columns in a page, and these things aren't permanently there. They won't print out, but what they will do is they'll show up in a grid system, and because this is quite common in book design, um, you'll see it's one of the defaults when you create this. So I'm going to put in 3 just so we can see them, and I'm going to put 0.25 inches. So that means the gutter, what the gutter is the space between columns. So this is a 1/4 inch between columns. When I click somewhere else, you're going to see that this numeral value is going to change to pikas. It's going to convert it to 1 pika 6. And then margins are the top, bottom, inside, and outside. So the reason it's inside and outside is that it'll allow for the margins to flip as they go from the left page to the right page. So there needs to be an inside margin, which would be the margin where the book is bound in the seam, and then the outside margin, which is on the edge of the outside edge of the page on the left or right side. If I uncheck facing page, you'll notice that it changes now to a left and right margin because there is no inside and outside, since it's treating it as solitary pages. You can make each one of these a specific notation by its own notation by unclicking this lock. This lock basically, like you see the display, make all the settings the same, so it makes all these uniform. A lot of times people want your bottom margin to be a little bit larger, and the reason that people do that, and I always usually ask this question in class, is why do they do that? And it's like, well, the answer is oftentimes for page numbering. So you have a larger bottom margin because you need additional space for your numbering. If your numbering is on the inside or outside page, or the outside of the page area, which some books do number that way, then you would place additional margin on the outside edge, or just in general because your grid system demands it. The bleed and slug, this deals with print production, so sometimes you might want to specify a bleed or an area for that might be a restriction for the printer, where it's an area that extends outside of the page that is necessary for appropriate trimming. Um, So, and then I'm not going to go into slug because that's something that isn't really utilized as significantly as the bleed. All right, so margin, I'm going to do like 0.25 inches, 0.75 inches for the bottom. Inside, I'm going to do 0.5 inches. And the inside for facing pages oftentimes is wider as well, and this is a design concern. The reason that we do that is because, and I'm sure many of you experience this, when you're opening up a book and you can't open it wide enough to see all the imagery or see all the text because the text is moving inside the spine, so that's why they do that. And then outside I'm just going to leave it 0.25 inches as well. And then if you hit preview, it'll show you a preview of the document, so you can kind of see what it's going to look like in the end. So this is our this is our outside, this is our inside, top, gutters, 3 columns, and as I said, these columns, this is actually a just a grid. It's not something that is going to be visible in print. So I'm just going to hit OK. In it, the architecture is very similar to all the other programs. You have a left toolbar, you have windows on the right, you have your control panel on the top, tabs, just like before for multiple files, and then you have your drop-down menu on the top of the screen. So everything's kind of the same. The only major difference is your ability to utilize pages, which you can still do in Illustrator, but it's a little bit different. It's actually more appropriate for this program. So just quickly, to go over a few things, the letter T for the type tool, just like before. Line tool, pen tool functions exactly the same as the pen tool in Illustrator. Same for the pencil tool and the smooth tool and erase tool. They all work the same way. The only difference in shapes, which is kind of really not necessary, is that there's these some of these shapes are picture frames, so it's kind of like they're masks, and then these are actual shapes, and you really can turn the shape into a frame, but you know, if you want to start out with the frame, this is how you do it. Free transform tool, gradient feather tool, eyedropper tool functions similar to Illustrator. Hand tool functions similar, zoom tool functions similar. So a lot of these we've already gone over. You still have swatches, you still have colors, you still have all your type options, you still get to show and hide options here. You have strokes. You know, almost everything should be, you know, self-explanatory at this point. The only thing that's really different is pages, excuse me. So right now there's a line here that indicates the spine of the book, which is where the pages meet. So if I create my first page, just like when you first open a book, there's only one page to the right. If I increase that, you see this is what we call a spread. And when you double click on the pages, you can move from one page to the next. So I can go to page 1 right here, and I know it's I know that it's selected because of this highlight on the page numerals. Now if you just click, it'll highlight the page, but unless this bottom part is clicked, as you can see, I'm still on page 1. And there's also a little caret up there. There's some notation down here that gives you some additional options to also tell you where you're at. So like here you see page 2, and that also allows you to kind of go through any individual pages, so specifically page 3, specifically page 1, or the A masters. Now what you can see what the master is, and that's actually located up here, and this is one of the most difficult concepts for students to grasp. It's very difficult for me to grasp as well. But your master pages are basically templates that you can apply to different pages. So right now there's a letter A in the corner, top outside corner of each one of these pages. If I double click on the master page, I'm now in a spread. And what the master page is, and I'll zoom out a bit. So I have my left master page and my right master page for this template, A master. Now if I'm going to pick a color real quick just so it's easily visible. And now we're also like Illustrator, we're back to stroke and fill, just so y'all know. If I draw a pink square on my left page for my master page, and you see like now all these pages that are labeled A, I'm double clicking them now, have a pink square on them. If I go back to the master page by double clicking, I can delete that. And so what this is really useful for is, say you have like a title for the chapter title on the top area, which is not uncommon. Say you have a specific location for the page numbers. That's not uncommon to always have. So it's a really useful tool in that it provides you the ability to have consistency throughout the publication. InDesign's all about making things easier for the designer, so that they don't have to do the same thing over and over again. Another thing I want to point out, and I'm just going to double click on the page again, is that you cannot edit the master page from the existing pages. So once a master page is applied, it's applied. However, if you don't like it, like say I want the master page on page 1, but not to be working on page 3, you can click on the None page, and if you drag it over, and you see how it highlights, and I let go, this has no master, and there's no longer an A. If I double click, and I want to create a new master page or a new template, so say like there's another chapter section that I need to design. One chapter section's named one thing, the other chapter section's named another thing. I'm going to hit New, and now I have B master. So anything that I apply B master to is going to have a little B letter, and so on and so forth. It's very rational, but sometimes the system is a little bit difficult. One of the biggest mistakes students make on my class on a regular basis is that they think that they're working in these pages, the editable pages, but they're actually working on the master pages, and they don't realize it. Just like before, you can click and drag guides to help you. You can turn on and off guides with the command quotation mark or semicolon, or command semicolon, excuse me, just like you would in Illustrator. So a lot of these things are similar. So I'm going to double click on my regular page again. And just to quickly go over type. So one of the things that's different about InDesign is, for one, you only really have type tool and type on a path tool. Now the reason you don't have type area tool is because all type is an area type tool. You can't just click on screen and then type. I just clicked on screen. You can kind of see this flicker that lets you know I'm clicking. It doesn't work like that, and this is one of the things that's a little bit more frustrating for me to use InDesign when I'm trying to do something that's creative, because I feel like it's not as expressive. You can't just click and then type something and rotate it. You have to always draw a text box by clicking and dragging. And so like now this is a text box, and as you type in the text box, I can keep pushing. I copied it and keep hitting Command V. You see it always, where it ends, it just keeps on ending on the edge. And you can move that edge so it extends over 2 columns or 1 column. And since under View, for my guides, I have them snapping to guides, this automatically fits in that space. Just like before with the type tool, you have all these options, and you can get to them by hitting Command T. And then one thing that I didn't go over that you also have the capability of in InDesign and in an Illustrator are styles. So I'm going to go over Window Styles. There's a lot of different ones. Each one, essentially, it's basically like if you have to do something over and over and over again, you can save all the changes that are the same. So I'm going to open up Character Styles just so we can have that and take a look. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the word box, and I'm going to change its color and I'm going to change its size, and I'm going to change it to papyrus just as a joke, because there was that video recently. And I might even like I might even do things like make the kerning or the tracking pretty negative. So now I'm going to go to character style, and in character style, while I have this text highlighted, it's important that this text is highlighted, the stuff that I change. I'm going to click the new button, and when I do that, I get character style 1, which is all the properties of box. If I double click the character style, I can rename it to like pink cool stuff, and then I can go through and I'll see the size is 40 point papyrus, the tracking's at -100, and I can change the color, other things. So what happens, what's really cool, is that now if I highlight a piece of text and I want it to look like text box, instead of having to go to the type tool, go into swatches, go into changing the lighting, etc., I can just go into character style, click cool pink stuff, and it automatically adopts all the characteristics. And this is really useful for if you have like the same style headline over and over again. You don't want to spend, just in 1 second you change all these properties, especially if you're pretty meticulous about it. What's cool about it also is, say you make a bunch of headlines, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy a few of these just to kind of simulate this concept. A bunch of headlines. Now instead of highlighting each individual one, if your client decides that I want all these pink, I don't like pink, I want them to all be blue, if I double click pink cool stuff's character style and I go to character color and change it to cyan and hit OK, what it's going to do is it's going to change the color of every single instance that is labeled pink cool stuff. You see? So now instead of having to go in and change every individual one, all I have to do is change the character style, and that's what makes it incredibly useful. Paragraph styles work exactly the same way. Object styles work exactly the same way, except it's an object. So the stroke, whether the stroke color, the box color, etc., like all those things get affected by saving it here or here or here. Oops, not text wrap. Or here. Sorry about that. So like each one of those allow you to save the properties that you had given to a specific shape or text or paragraph style, which would be things like, if I create new, double click it, you'll see it's things like formatting, the alignment, those kinds of things. Open type features in this case, if you want to do that, hyphenation, justification, lots of different other different options that I encourage you to do on your own. It's, like I said, it's pretty self-explanatory. Another thing to pay attention to, if you notice there's this little red plus sign that appears with the text box, what that means is that there's text that is hiding in the text frame. You see it disappeared after there was enough room for all the content that was in there. But if I shrink it down, it'll be here. Now what's useful about this, and I'm going to show this in a minute, but first I want to actually copy a bunch of type. I know that's spelled wrong. I'm just typing too fast. So I was thinking maybe I'll do this Frederick Douglass essay. Actually, I think I have it already on my desktop. Here we go. Oops, not that one. In the Indesign file, it actually already has some of the text that I use in this text document, so it's a rich text format, so it's all put together. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy it all, actually. And then when I make a text box and I paste all that content, well, that's a little bit big. Let's put it at 12 point. When I have all that content and you see it extends outside the box, what you can do is if you hover over that red icon and click in the next column, it will place the rest of the stuff, the rest of the content. So if you look at this, I'm going to change this title of this next poem, E. Cummings, just so you can see what happens. As I add stuff in this box, it moves over to the next one. So this is really useful while you're editing, because instead of what you would have to do if these weren't linked up, is you would have to edit something in here and then edit whatever it changed as far as arrangement to here. So that might mean cutting some information out and pasting it in this extra box, which can be frustrating. Let me just show that real quick. So if I had something here, and then I had like the other half, I'm just going to delete what's visible, the other half here. So when I type something and it goes outside the box and changes the way the content, like, I have to then figure out, like, well, it went beyond that area, so I got to highlight it, cut it out, place it in this next box, and then now it's continuous the way I want it to be. However, that becomes a problem over the course of 20, 30 pages where you have multiple columns of text that's all linked together, because then you have to do that for each column over and over again until it changes. So it's good to have your text box linked. So easy, fast way to do it. So if I have this text box again, do this again. This time I'm actually going to do just the Frederick Douglass essay, Hypocrisy of Slavery in America. When I want to move this across the document, and I'm going to make a handful of pages, because what it does is it goes through, there's a way to get it to go across pages, and it goes basically until either the content ends or the pages end. So when I click it this time, what I'm going to do is I'm holding the Option key down now, and it fills in the one solitary column, okay? And then there's, like, as you can see, there's actually like room for more. So if I click on it again, and this time I hold the Shift Option key, which again, just like every tool, when you hold Shift or you hold Option, it does different things. If I hold Shift Option and click, it fills in every single column until I run out of content or until I run out of pages, which is really easy and fast way to fill out a whole, like, so if you were doing like an entire chapter this way, it would be really easy, because you could have your whole chapter, make the pages that you think you need, and then you hold Shift Option, and now as long as your styling for the type is the same across all those pages, you now have filled in that entire chapter. Makes it really fast, and that's what InDesign is really about. It's about being as efficient as possible. Now, there are also so with Illustrator we went over the basic grid system, which was in preferences. So you had like units and increments, and you had grids. But in InDesign we have our basic document grid that we looked at in Illustrator, but which here we can actually modify it based on the horizontal and the vertical. So it's a little bit different, and we can change subdivisions. But we can also do what we call the baseline grid. The baseline grid is a grid that's based on type. So type can interact with the baseline grid in an interesting manner. So right now, our baseline grid is at 12 points for every increment, and it's relative to the top of the page. I can make it relative to the top margin, and then it allows for me to start here in this margin instead of the top of the page, which makes it more directly paralleling my grid system, my existing grid system. So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to do that type tool again just so you can see the baseline grid in action. and I'm going to actually change this to Helvetica and change it to a black so it's just easier to see. Change it to 12 point. Oh, I'm going to also change this to normal. Okay, so I'm going to make 2 columns just so we can see this. So the problem with like not having a baseline grid, and I'm going to, let's view the baseline grid. So show baseline grid, or option command apostrophe. We see our grid. So that's every 12 points. So this type is actually, as you can see, is 12-point type, and then the grid is 12 points. So if I place this on the grid, right now, you see how I have to kind of do it by eye, and I'm using the arrow keys to make sure that these columns are lined up across. But as you can also see, the grid, they don't always match the grid. And what there is to fix this, that's a useful tool in Illustrator, is that if I highlight my text that I want to fit, actually I can get my text to lock to the baseline grid, and I'm going to click on paragraph, and then there's this option right here, align to baseline grid, and right now they are not aligned to baseline grid. And if I click on it, now all my text, as you can see, fits to it, but there's a problem here. So like obviously it's going every other line, and the reason is because I have 12-point type with a 12-point increment of the baseline grid, so they're not interacting with each other the way I want. Typically your leading, which is refers to the vertical these vertical spacing of the lines, here you can see it right here, so you see letter A on top of letter A because it's the space between lines of text, is 120% the scale. So right now my type wants to be 14.4 points for each line, so it's jumping to another grid. If I change the type size on a single line, you'll see that it'll jump around the baseline grid eventually. You see how it's moving and shifting. So what I can do is I can make sure that if I know that this is going to be my body copy type size the whole time, I can go back to my preferences, and I know that for a 12-point grid, if I want it to work, maybe I make my type 10 points instead, because 12 is 120% of 10. Oops, I gotta highlight it first. And now my type fits and conforms to the baseline grid accurately. And now no matter where I move this type, it'll always be aligned with each other. It'll be visually harmonious, and that's something that you want to strive for in design. All right, so another useful tip. Another thing that you can do in your which is more useful in your master pages actually, is, and this will be the last thing that you really need to know for the first assignment. Well, actually, not entirely, but the last typographical, I should be more accurate, the last typographical thing that you'll need to know for this assignment. So if I double click on my master, there's a way that I can create page numbers, and I mentioned that in the past. When we first create a new document, I mentioned how like instead of page 1, it can start on page 20. So I'm going to create a text box for my page numbers, and instead of just typing in a number, what you can do is under the type drop-down menu, there's a thing called insert special character, symbols, markers, hyphens, quotation marks, and all these are like different options that you can get for characters that you might not easily have access to. But under markers, as you can see, there's a current page number, next page number, previous page number, etc. If I click current page number, what I get is a variable, and I can change that variable to whatever typeface I want. So right now it's Helvetica. I'm changed it back to black. I'll make it bold. I can change the type size to 12 point. And I can change the location of it. So right now on my master page on the right side, I have this. So if I go to any master page that has an A on it, I now see number page 1, page 3, page 5. These don't have numbers, and the reason, and this is another common mistake that students make, is that they don't have numbers and they wonder why. It's because you haven't made a left side notation, and you can easily just copy this here, copy and paste your same one. It doesn't matter because this is a variable for current page number. It doesn't matter that I made it for this page. Now if I go to the other ones, you see 4 is now there. Double click, now 2 is there. And this is really useful. So now for our project, which if you double click your file, you have this 4 images, and the assignment is to basically make the exact same type setting and size for these pages. And to first find the page size itself, we did that by, well, not Illustrator, sorry. We did that by going to Photoshop, and we can find image size to be able to tell what the actual dimensions of the page are. And these pages are at 300 dpi, so they're very high res. They're very easy for you to see and to utilize. So I'm going to go to Image, Size, and right now it's 10 inches by 10 inches at 300 pixels per inch. So I know, if I go back to InDesign, so I know that I want to start out with a page that's 10 inches by 10 inches. Now I can create a new document to do that, or there's ways to change the page content. So under File, Document Setup, I can say 10 inches by 10 inches, and now I have these square document that's actually appropriate to my other content. I also need to make sure that the gutters and the page, the type size and all that is accurate. So what I'm going to do to accomplish that is for each page, I'm going to go to File, Place, and when I go to it, I can bring up, I gotta go to the desktop. I can bring in my pages. So this is the first page, and you're gonna have 4 pages. That's another common mistake students do in my classes, is that they actually make 4 separate documents. I don't want 4 separate documents. I want 4 pages in a single document. So we're gonna click on Open, and then we get like a thumbnail of the image. Now I'm going to place it by clicking the top left corner of this page, and it just drops it in. And this is actually the scale, so I'm just going to move this up a little bit. So don't distort it. You're not going to change the size of this. You're just going to do the scale. And another thing, just so that you don't get confused if you accidentally do it, when you change the grab these handlebars and move them over, it actually doesn't distort the image. It changes how much of the image can be visible. You see? So if you miss part of your image, it's probably because you pulled one of these handles by accident. So the one thing that also sometimes confuses students is that right now mine are crisp. If yours are pixelated, it's not because you got the wrong image or you used a bad image. It's because you need to go to View, Display Performance, and right now I have a high quality display. Typical display is what the default is, and as you can see, it's pixelated. Now the reason that InDesign does that is because it's made for several hundred pages. So for some of you, you've already had issues where you've had a high-res image in Photoshop crash Photoshop. So imagine 200 high-quality, realist, high-res images for like a photography book. It's going to always crash your computer. So instead of having 200 of those pages functioning at the same time, you can kind of have a lower quality variant just so you can see where it's placed, you know what it's looked like. But if you really need to, you can always go to View, Display Performance, High Quality Display. And that lets you perfectly see all the content. So what I recommend is you can change the document size, so you can guess, but I'm pretty sure that this is probably 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go to File, Document Setup, and I'm going to change my actually, sorry, it's under Layout, Margin Columns. I don't know why Adobe didn't put all this information in the same location, because you make it all in when you open a document. Why wouldn't it all be in the document setup? But it isn't, so it's in a different location. I'm sure there's a intelligent reason for that. I just don't personally know what it is. So click on Margin Columns. I'm going to make them 0.25 inches all around. And then I'm going to hit OK. So as you can see, I was right. I might also lock this. So locking an object in InDesign is different than Illustrator. Go to Object, it is Command L. Instead of, I think, Command 2. In Illustrator, I think it's Command 2. So there, I should have that memorized. But there we go. So now when I click on this image, I can't actually do anything to it. The next step, of course, would be to make my text box. So I can click and drag. And then basically it's a matter of finding the correct typeface and type size to make sure that it matches this content. And it's actually like quite an easy concept, but a lot of students don't get it because they're not paying attention to the page size to make sure it matches. They're not paying attention to even where the numbers are located. So right now we actually can't see the master page numbers. The reason is because the master page numbers are actually on layer 1, and we place something on layer 1. An easy way to fix that is to click, I'm going to click both page numbers, hit Command X, and I'm going to go to my layers. So you have layers in InDesign 2. I'm going to hit New, and I'm going to place all my numbers on layer 2 and I'm going to hit Edit, Paste, and Place, and then I'm going to lock layer 2 so that I can't mess with it. And then when I go to Pages, now I can see my page number, and I know that it isn't in the correct location because here's the original number 1, here's the number 1 that I need. So what I would do here is I would then again place the, and now I just have to do it for 1 because the page numbers are in the same place every time. I would place in my master pages, I would also place the document and then move and change the scale of my letter A to match the size and location of that number. It's actually pretty easy, a lot easier than people make the project out to be. And that's pretty much it. You have 4 of these, so an essay and 2 poems that you have to typeset exactly the same typeface, the same type size, the same letter spacing, everything the same as the text that you see in the JPEGs that I provided as a demo. And then all that text, so you don't have to type it out from scratch, is in this text file. Unarranged, they're not arranged correctly, but it's in there. So that's it. And I'll make another video for the second half of the InDesign segment of the class.